Welcome back to my free podcasting course. I'm Nicholas, and in this video, we're going to be talking about step 2, which is to design your brand for your podcast. So let's jump right in. The visual identity of your podcast is very important because even though people are just listening to the show, the way they're first going to encounter the show, chances are they're going to be looking at the cover art, which is sort of like the album cover. If you remember way back, there were record albums with all these really cool designs on them, and a lot of people would make buying decisions based on what the record album cover looked like. The same could be said for cassettes or CDs or whatever. Even if you're browsing Netflix, think about how important those covers are and how many decisions you've made to watch a show on Netflix or not based on the cover. So you want to create a cover that is really going to represent your podcast well while also standing out. So I took here a screenshot of some of the most popular podcasts right now on Apple Podcast. I think this is from the business category. And so you can see there's different styles of covers. For instance, you have some where it's a sort of a headshot or a hero shot of the host. You have some that are more of like an animated character, like what they have with Planet Money, or it's just animated with different icons, like what's happening with the NPR Life Kit podcast. And then you have some that are really minimalistic, like Jocko Podcast or How I Built This, where it's more of just a playful way of doing the text alignment or the design of the typography. But there's some other things to point out here. If you had to pick a cover here that stands out the most, which one is it? It's probably going to be the red one right there, the Gary Vee podcast, right? Because that's the one that's the most striking because it's a red background. So I'm not saying you should use red, but maybe look in the category that you plan on listing your podcast, whether it's a business podcast or a lifestyle podcast or whatever, and try to find out what are the colors that are being used the most, and maybe avoid those colors, and try to create a color for your background that is going to represent your brand, but also stand out. Now, when it comes time to actually build your cover, I recommend getting a professional designer to do it, unless you are already a graphic designer, because there's a lot of times where I see a podcast listed and it sounds like it might be a good podcast based on the name, but because the cover art looks so low quality, it just doesn't send a professional message. And so therefore, a lot of people may skip over that. So you can use a site like Fiverr or Upwork to find a graphic designer, or even 99 Designs. And a lot of these services are very affordable, and you only have to pay once for a really good cover, and then you can use that forever. So really do put some time into getting a well-designed podcast cover. Now, just like you need to create the visual identity, you also need to create the audio identity for your podcast. So what does that mean? Well, what I'm talking about here is an intro and an outro. Now, not every podcast has this. There's a lot of podcasts that sort of just jump right into the content, but I would say for the majority of podcasts, they have what are called intros and outros. I have them on all of my shows because I like people to be able to understand what the podcast is about in the intro. So it's sort of like a little preview or an overview of what the podcast is. And it also creates this recognition because when they hear the music and they hear the opening, it's sort of like a familiar opening, just like an intro on a Netflix series, right? It's something that people are going to remember. So if you create that, you're really creating like an audio logo or an audio identity. So just like you're going to put time into creating the cover, I would recommend also investing some time into creating an intro and an outro. How do you get one of these created? You can go on Fiverr again, you can go on Upwork, you can find an audio engineer, you can try to put one together yourself with like a voiceover, and then you can try to get some background music, like royalty-free background music, or you can use a service where they specialize in this, and I actually used this service here, musicradiocreative.com, recently for when I redid one of my intros, and I was very happy with how they did it. So they are professionals at finding the voiceover talent, finding the background music, mixing it together for you. So you basically just provide them with the script. And you want to keep these short. So the intro, it's just going to be, maybe 10 seconds or so of what your podcast is about. And it's something that's going to play on every single intro of all of your podcasts. So definitely put some thought into creating an intro and an outro. Okay, so the other things you have to do to set up your brand is to create some social profiles, because one of the best ways for people to discover a podcast is on social media. So make sure that you or your brand has a presence on the big social networks like Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Maybe YouTube as well, maybe TikTok, whatever is popular for your audience. And this goes back to the first step where we talked about understanding who your audience is. Once you understand your audience, you're going to know where they are online, and that's where you can create your social media presence. Now, there's a lot of questions that come up of, do I need to have an Instagram page just for my podcast, or can it be just for me, or can it be my company if your company is connected to your podcast in some way? And really, that's up to you. I've seen it work very successfully in all those different scenarios, where some big podcasts have dedicated social profiles just for the podcast, while other times I see it where maybe just the host has his own social profile or her social profile, and that's what they use to promote their show along with other things. And other times I see it where it's the company that's behind it, like maybe NPR. They have a whole bunch of podcasts, and then they have their NPR social media channels, which sort of share all of that content. So there's a lot of different ways to set it up. There's no perfect solution, but you do want to put some thought into what method you'll be using as you create these social profiles, or as you use these social profiles to promote your show. You also want to create a website if you don't already have one, and it doesn't need to be difficult. In fact, there's a lot of ready-to-go podcast host websites like Buzzsprout, which is a really good podcast host. I just started using Buzzsprout for my newest podcast, the Growth Marketer Podcast, because for my other two shows I use Libsyn. And what I liked about Buzzsprout is that they create this really nice dynamic website for you just by uploading your podcast and signing up. So it's easy to create, it's easy to edit. Of course, it doesn't give you the full flexibility of having your own website, but you can change the domain. It's really, really flexible. And it looks really good on mobile devices as well. So whether you're creating a website in WordPress or Squarespace or whatever it may be, you want to have some type of presence online for people to go, because you don't want to just send people to Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You want to have them to have an opportunity to send them to some central destination that's going to have links to all of those other channels as a place for people to connect with your show. Well, that's going to do it for this third video in the free podcast course where we talked about designing your brand. In the next video, we're going to talk about step 3, which is choosing your technology. I know this is a part that gets a lot of people hung up on the technology and the complicated nature of trying to figure out all the audio and technical stuff, but don't worry, I'm going to break it all down for you in the next video. So I'll see you there.